He didn't just kill his victims, he savaged them in unspeakable ways. He raped them with a sadism that made veteran police officers cringe. This killer blew off his victims' faces at point-blank range. He slashed and stabbed with knives and bludgeoned with clubs. He crushed one victim's neck with a broomstick. Tall, dour, and icy-eyed, McDuff had scattered corpses around central Texas. Estimates have ranged upward of 15 since he was a teenager. So who is this ogre who terrorized a whole state? There is little recorded information on the early life of Kenneth McDuff. What we do know is that he was born on Sunday, the 3rd of March, 1946, at 201 Linden Street, in the small central Texas hamlet of Rosebud Falls County. The saying, "all is rosy in Rosebud," suggests a cozy place untroubled by violence. The earliest settlers arrived in Falls County from Mexico at the time of the War of Independence in 1836. The economy depended on cotton. Slavery was rife, and between 1866 and 1890, the Chisholm Trail and Kansas railroads passed close by. During the Wild West days, Rosebud's 11 saloons were filled with drunken cowboys. Saturday night shootouts were commonplace, and today, the original calaboose remains intact, as does open-range law, meaning that cows have the right of way. On the eastern edge of Rosebud, Linden Street heads south from Main Street toward a baseball field, carved out of surrounding farmland. Small wooden houses, old but well-kept, and shaded by large pecan trees, line the streets. On the east side of Linden, only the second building from Main, stands a premises that was once the Rosebud Laundromat. A small living area is connected to the rear of the laundromat, where the family of John Allenja McDuff lived. At least some of the McDuff's children, including 2 boys named Lonzo, Lonnie, and Kenneth, were born in far-off Paris, Texas, and no one seems to know why the McDuffs, who lived in the Blackland Prairie before moving to Rosebud, ended up in the area. Kenneth was one of 4 children born to Addie L. McDuff and John Allenja McDuff. J.A. did farm, masonry, and concrete work. His wife was a hefty, domineering woman named Addie. Addie ruled the roost, and she was known locally as the pistol-packin' mama. On account of her violent temper and her habit of toting a sidearm in her handbag, Ken was in trouble from the moment he could walk. He grew up to be a bully, a sadistic child who roamed the neighborhood with a .22 caliber rifle, shooting any animal or bird that fell into his sights. The town's residents called him the bad boy of Rosebud. People feared him even as a teenager, and he beat up any youth who upset him, whether they were older or not. Mrs. Martha Royal, McDuff's 5th-grade teacher, remembers him as intelligent youngster, but something of a loner. Kenneth was the son of a mild-mannered, hard-working father who was in the building trade, and a permissive mother who was quick to excuse his misdeeds. His troubles began in junior high and never stopped. He did not get on with the other children very well. He seemed to live in a world of his own. On several occasions, I tried to speak with him in private, to ask if he had any problems at home and things like that, but he wouldn't say a word to me. He just stared straight into my face. From the age of 5, he had murder in his eyes. It was quite disturbing, I can tell you that. McDuff was always in trouble. In his teens, he was involved in robberies with his brother, and more than once, Sheriff Larry Pamplin said he tried to shoot their car tires out, but they always got clean away. McDuff's documented criminal career began in 1964, when, aged 18, he was convicted of 12 counts of burglary and attempted burglary in Belle Milam and Falls County. He received 12 concurrent 4-year sentences for these crimes, but achieved parole in Falls County in December 1965. Several months later, he got into a fracas and his parole was revoked. In 1966, he was released, and a short time later, he committed capital murder with an accomplice, a somewhat weak-willed 18-year-old called Roy Dale Green. Green was employed as a carpenter's helper. He had previously lived with his mother, but after she remarried, he moved in with a friend called Richard Boyd. It was Boyd who introduced Green to McDuff, and at the time of the triple homicide, the two men had known each other only a month. The two men seemed to hit it off well. McDuff was a well-built, good-looking 20-year-old who was proud of his criminal record. He was a tough, no-nonsense young man. He spoke his mind and he bragged about his sexual conquests to the point that he said that he had raped 2 young women and killed them. Green, on the other hand, was a weedy individual with a speech impediment who looked up to his stronger companion. But secretly, he put McDuff's murderous claims down to hogwash. The two men spent Saturday, the 6th of August, pouring concrete for McDuff's father, and after completing their labors, decided to drive into Fort Worth for a few drinks. At around 5:00 p.m., they climbed into McDuff's brand-new Dodge Coronet and rode around before buying a pack of beer from a 7-Eleven store. At 7:00 p.m., they visited Edith Turner, a mutual friend, and later they bought a hamburger. Meanwhile, 3 teenagers, Robert Brand of Alvarado, age 18, his cousin, 16-year-old Mark Dunman from Tarzana, California, and Robert's girlfriend, vivacious 16-year-old Edna Louise Sullivan from Everman, spent the evening at a drive-in movie. When the show finished, they drove to a spot near a baseball field in Guadalupe County, where they parked their 1957 Ford. At around 10:00 p.m., McDuff and Green came on the scene, and the trio of teenagers became their randomly selected quarry. What took place is graphically described in the statement Green gave to Detective Grady Height. This is dated Monday, the 8th of August, 1966, the day Green gave himself up. We rode around the baseball park and wound up on a gravel road. He, McDuff, saw a car parked there, and we stopped about 150 yards in front of it. He got his gun and told me to get out. I thought it was all a joke. I just didn't believe what he said was going to happen. I went halfway to the car with him, and he went on. He told the kids in the car to get out or he would shoot them. I went on up there, and he had put them in the trunk of their car. He drove his car back to their car, and he told me to get in his car and follow him. I did, and we drove for a while across the highway we had come in on, and he pulled into a field. I followed, and he said that the field wouldn't do, so we backed up and went to another field. He got out and told the girl to get out. He told me to put her in the trunk of his car. I opened the trunk and she climbed in. It was then that he said that we couldn't leave any witnesses or something like that. He said, "I'm gonna have to knock 'em off," or something like that. I got really scared. I still thought he was joking, but I wasn't sure. They were on their knees begging him not to shoot them. They said, "We're not going to tell anybody." I turned towards him and he stuck the gun into the trunk of where the boys were and started shooting. I saw the fire come out of the gun on the first shot, and I covered my ears and looked away. He shot 6 times. He shot one twice in the head, and he shot the other boy 4 times in the head. A bullet went through a boy's arm as he tried to stop the fire. He tried to close the trunk, but it wouldn't close. He then told me to back up his car. By that time, I was almost dying of fright, and I did what he said. He got in the boy's car and backed it into a fence, and he got out and told me to help him wipe off the fingerprints. I wasn't going to argue with him. I was expecting to be next, so I helped him. After a break in the interview, Detective Height asked Green about the murder of Edna Sullivan, and what follows is again taken verbatim from Green's statement. "We wiped out the tire tracks and got into his car and drove off another mile and turned off on another road, and he stopped, and he got the girl out of the trunk and put her in the back seat. He told me to get out of the car, and I waited until he told her to get undressed. He took off his clothes and then he screwed her. He asked me if I wanted to do it, and I told him no. He asked me why not, and I told him I just didn't want to. He leaned over and I didn't see the gun, but thought he would shoot me if I didn't, so I pulled my pants and shirt off and got in the back seat and screwed the girl. She didn't struggle or anything, and if she ever said anything, I didn't hear her. All the time I was on top of the girl, I kept my eye on him. After that, he screwed her again. After Edna Sullivan had been raped several times, the two men drove her a short distance, then stopped. McDuff ordered Green out of the car and asked him if he had anything with which to strangle the girl. He offered McDuff his belt. Green then described the most brutal murder which followed. He told the girl to get out of the car. He made her sit down on the gravel road, and he took about a 3-foot piece of broomstick from his car and forced her head back with it until it was on the ground. He started choking her with the piece of broomstick. He mashed down hard, and she started waving her arms and kicking her legs. He told me to grab her legs, and I didn't want to. And he said, "It's gotta be done." And I grabbed her legs and held them for a second or so, then let them go. He said, "Do it again." And I did. And this time was when she stopped struggling. He had me grab her hands, and he grabbed her feet, and we heaved her over a fence. We crossed the fence ourselves, then he dragged her a short ways, and then he choked her some more. We put her in some kind of bushes there. That night, the two men stopped at a Hillsborough gas station for Coca-Colas before returning to Green's house, where they slept in the same bed. The following morning, McDuff buried the revolver by the side of his accomplice's garage, and they drove to a friend's house where Richard Boyd allowed McDuff to wash his car. Later in the day, Green was so overcome with fear and remorse that he had to confide in Boyd, whose parents called Green's mother, and she convinced her son to give himself up to the police. In 1968, McDuff received 3 death sentences while Roy Dale Green was sent to prison for 25 years. He served 13 years before being released on parole. In a damning indictment of the judicial process, McDuff's death sentence was commuted to life, and on the 11th of October 1989, he was set free and paroled to Milam County. During his time behind bars, McDuff walked to the electric chair on 2 occasions and each time received last-minute stays of execution. Then, in 1992, the death statute was ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court, so McDuff's death sentence was commuted to life. He would serve just a handful of years before his mother bribed a parole board official to rubber stamp his release. The result was that he was turned loose to murder, again and again and again. In the final outcome, McDuff's case revealed to the public what Texas politicians had known for years, that the state parole system was rife with bad judgment and the potential for corruption. His case provided just the latest twist in the old story that goes back at least to the early 1920s, when first the colorful governors Pa Ferguson and then Ma Ferguson used their power of clemency to free thousands of highly dangerous convicts by bribing officials. According to one apocryphal account, the way to get out of prison in those days was to buy a mule from Pa for $200. And why would a convict need a mule? To ride home from jail, was Pa's suggestion. The McDuff scandal was not simply limited to a corrupt parole board official. The seeds were sown in 1972 when a federal court ruled that the Texas Department of Corrections was overcrowded. The state was faced with 2 choices: either build more prisons or lock up fewer prisoners in the existing ones. 3 successive governors, Dolph Briscoe, Bill Clements, and Mark White, talked tough about crime, but did nothing to encourage the construction of new facilities because they were too expensive to build. By the end of Clement's second term in office, the system had just about broken down. With public pressure mounting by the day, the governor was forced to reconsider, and plans were drawn up for several new jails. In addition, in order to reduce the overcrowding problems, parole considerations were relaxed. The order was to parole 750 of the lowest-risk inmates a week. Before long, there were not even 750 inmates left in the entire system of some 60,000 who met eligibility standards. At that point, the parole system cracked under the strain. In its haste to meet the quota, the board began rubber-stamping the applications almost as soon as it received them. Applications were rushed through without being read properly, and with McDuff being just another number amongst thousands, he became one of the 20 former death row inmates and 127 murderers to be released. This shambles resulted from the fundamental problems with the system as it then operated, and Jim Parker, the legislative director for Governor Ann Richards, later made this point. Some people put in prison were less dangerous than the people being released. We're jailing hot check writers and DWIs driving without insurance and letting out the Kenneth McDuffs. In our panic to make our streets safe again, we're imprisoning non-violent offenders. We're filling up the available space with people who belong in drug rehabilitation centers or whose debt to society could be paid by doing community service. Because the Board of Pardons and Paroles was not empowered to set policy about who achieved parole, they relied on a few assumptions and wild speculative theories in determining who was safe to release and who was not. As one distinguished attorney put it, this was as random as throwing darts in the dark. Among the assumptions was the belief that, as most murders are committed in moments of rage or passion, such offenders are good parole risks because they are unlikely to kill for a second time. The weakness of this concept was that it did not take into account those criminals who kill for pure enjoyment, one of whom was Kenneth McDuff. Another ill-conceived theory was that a long time in prison breaks an inmate and burns out their meanness. This was certainly a parole consideration for McDuff when he was released after having served 23 years in jail. But in the lottery of number crunching to which the parole system had been reduced, McDuff and his ilk were inevitably lumped together with the more benign killers, who fitted the so-called category of unlikely to kill again. The strange consequence of this, as Jim Parker explained, isn't that we have just the one McDuff, it's that we don't have hundreds of McDuffs back on the streets. Within days of being released in October 1989, McDuff murdered 31-year-old Seraphia Parker, whose body was found on the 14th of October by a pedestrian strolling the 1500 block of East Avenue Temple, a small city 48 miles due south of Waco. She was black in her 20s, about 5 feet 6 in tall, and weighing about 150 pounds. She had been beaten and strangled no more than 24 hours before her body was found. She was quickly identified, and Texas Ranger John Aycock later located and interviewed a witness who thought he could place Parker in a pickup truck driven by McDuff on or around the 12th of October. On that day, Kenneth McDuff had reported to his parole officer, who happened to work in Temple. No other connection between the murder of Seraphia Parker and McDuff has been established or made public. McDuff was returned to prison for breaking his parole conditions after he made death threats against a black youth in Rosebud. And it was at this point that Addie McDuff stepped into the picture. She paid $1,500 to Huntsville attorney Bill Hayburn and his consulting partner Helen Kopitka of Austin, plus a further $700 for her expenses to evaluate her son's new parole prospects. Hayburn next spoke to James Granberry, the chairman of the parole board, a man known for his tendency to release convicted murderers from prison. It came as no surprise to learn that McDuff was back on the streets within a year, walking out of the prison gates on Tuesday, the 18th of December, 1990. Subsequently, Granberry resigned after coming under fire from a House investigation committee. He had the gall to set up his own parole consultancy firm, which he was forced to close amid a storm of public protest. Sometime during the evening of the 10th of October 1991, Brenda Thompson, a prostitute and drug addict, climbed into McDuff's red pickup truck in Waco. They drove south on Miller Street and encountered a Waco Police Department vehicle checkpoint on Faulkner Lane. McDuff stopped about 50 feet from the barrier, and one of the officers walked to the pickup. As he did so, he shone his torch on himself so that the driver could see clearly he was a police officer. Suddenly, Brenda began screaming and kicking. To the officer, it appeared as if her arms were tied behind her back, and she was desperately trying to get out of the truck. She lay back and began kicking at the windshield with such force that it shattered on the passenger's side. She continued to kick vigorously, with her legs clad in a pair of red polyester pants, cracking the windshield more and more with each kick. McDuff immediately floored the accelerator and drove straight at the officers. According to the police report filed that day, 3 officers had to move quickly to avoid being hit. As the vehicle sped off, the patrolmen scrambled to their cars to give chase. McDuff raced south on Miller Street toward Waco Drive, turned off his lights and disappeared into the darkness, taking Brenda Thompson with him. He eluded police by going the wrong way on one-way streets. Eventually, he turned west on US 84 and then north on Golson Road for about 8 miles until he arrived at a wooded area where, furious at the damage done to his prized pickup, he inflicted an excruciatingly torturous death on Brenda. Her body was discovered near Golson Road on the 3rd of October 1998, just a month before McDuff's eventual execution. On the 15th of October 1991, McDuff dated a 17-year-old hooker called Virginia Deanne Moore. At around 11:30 p.m., the couple were seen arguing outside a Waco motel, and a witness said they then drove away in a pickup truck. McDuff took Virginia to a remote area along Highway 6, north and east of Waco. At the site of a bridge traversing the Tewakana Creek, McDuff pulled off the road onto a very steep embankment down to the edge of the creek, where he drove under the bridge. Passing motorists could not have seen his car. The road there is a freeway, and cars rushing over the bridge easily made enough noise to drown out any screams Virginia may have made. A forensics team recovered Virginia's body on Wednesday, the 29th of September, from a sinkhole near Tewakana Creek. Her hands had been tied behind her back, and her ankles were bound with stockings tied together in such a way as to allow her sufficient movement to hobble along. McDuff had apparently marched her to the spot where she was killed. The remains of her dress were wrapped around her pelvic area. She was found lying on her back with her legs bent. After being missing for 7 years, Virginia was finally going home to her mother. During the late afternoon of Sunday, the 29th of December, 1991, 28-year-old Colleen Reed, a native of Ville Platte, Louisiana, drove into the Texas state capital of Austin, where she deposited $200 at an ATM. She then went shopping for a gallon of milk and a bottle of vitamins at Whole Foods Market on North Lamar Boulevard, and afterwards drove to the car wash at West 5th Street. Witnesses recalled seeing a light-colored late-model Ford Thunderbird, which was heading towards the car wash. They heard a short scream before the car's door slammed shut and watched in amazement as the vehicle screeched away along Powell Street, leaving a cloud of exhaust smoke in its wake. Standing at 5 feet 3 in, weighing 115 pounds, with dark brown hair and brown eyes, Colleen was wearing gold-rimmed glasses, blue jeans, a t-shirt, and a black and white Nike jacket. Her body was found on the 6th of October, 1998, after McDuff gave police the location of the grave. It was in a grassy area that had been a popular fishing and partying spot for McDuff when he was growing up. By now, police suspected that he was a serial murderer, although he remained extremely elusive and almost impossible to track down. The best hope was that he would make a mistake. The pursuers' luck changed when investigator Tim Steglich of the Bell County Sheriff's Department pulled in one of McDuff's known associates for questioning. What follows is the April 1992 statement of 34-year-old Alva Hank Worley, who was an accomplice of McDuff's in the abduction, rape, and murder of Colleen Reed. McDuff picked me up at 6 or 7 that night. We went to Love's truck stop near Temple, and he got gas. I don't know if he used a credit card or paid cash. We started to go towards Austin, and it was just kind of understood we were going to get some speed or coke, whatever we could find. We stopped at a Conoco truck stop on Interstate 35, on the northbound side of the highway, past Jarrell. I bought a 6-pack of Budweiser long necks. We had already drunk a 6-pack or better before that. McDuff drove on to Austin, and I thought we were going down to the UT, University of Texas, campus to get the dope. But Mac drove downtown and drove around because we had beer left. He would not let me get any more beer after the second 6-pack. I don't know why. I know we went down 6th Street and in that area. I remember we got a hamburger at Dairy Queen, I think on Congress. I remember the streets were real lit up at that time. We rode around and ate. Mac was just driving and he pulled into a car wash right into a bay, and I thought he was going to wash his car. I need to explain that we were in Mac's cream Ford Thunderbird. It was about 8:30, or 9 p.m. when we pulled into this wash. Worley went on to explain that McDuff spotted the young woman, and within seconds he had her by the throat and was dragging her towards his car. She was shouting like hell, Worley added. She was screaming, "Not me, not me, please let me go." He took her to the driver's side and shoved her in the back seat. Her hands were tied behind her. I think she was saying, "Please let me go, please don't let this happen to me." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. He got in the driver's seat and drove off, just fast enough to get away in a hurry. Begging for her life, Colleen Reed was subjected to what can only be described as a ride of terror, as the threesome headed north along Interstate 35 towards Round Rock, where McDuff pulled over and stopped the car. Climbing into the back with Colleen, McDuff ordered Worley to drive, and then the raping started. I remember he told her to take her clothes off, so I don't know if he untied her. He was telling her, "All you have to do is fuck." He was trying to put it in her head that if she would just fuck, she would be turned loose. She was saying she would do what she was told. She was trying to buy time. That's what she was trying to do. Mac had his shirt off, and I believe he had his pants down. I do not know if the kid was facing up or down when he raped her. I remember he made her give him a head job. I remember that because he almost choked her. Mac had hit her several times in the head when he first got in the back with her. He was forcing her head down on him, and she was choking. I was just driving, and when I got to the Stillhouse Hollow exit, I decided to get out there to go to my sister's house. Mac was just sitting there at Stillhouse. I pulled over near the spillway, near the trailer houses there. I moved over to the passenger seat, and Mac got the keys out and popped the trunk. He pulled her out of the back seat and put her in the trunk. She was quiet at that time, and he had to force her into the trunk. That was the last time I saw that girl or heard anything about her. Mac drove to my sister's house. After further questioning, Worley admitted that McDuff had asked to borrow his penknife and a shovel. He also said that McDuff had burned the woman with a cigarette on the vagina, but insisted that he did not know what happened to Colleen Reed after that. He said that he had not seen McDuff since. The next day, Tim Steglich interviewed Worley for the second time. Under pressure from the intensive interrogation, he admitted that they had driven along a deserted track, just a mile from McDuff's parents' home at Temple. "I did rape her," Worley finally conceded, but Mac broke her neck after he tortured some more with the lighted cigarettes. He snapped her neck and it sounded like a tree limb breaking. Then he threw her like a sack of potatoes into the trunk of his car. Frank Worley was charged with rape and murder, and he was held in the Travis County Jail in lieu of $350,000 bail, while a manhunt for McDuff was launched. The body of Colleen Reed was recovered shortly before McDuff's execution. On Sunday, the 24th of February, 1992, McDuff strangled a part-time black prostitute and student called Valencia Joshua while he was attending the Texas State Technical College in Waco. At the time, he was studying to become a machinist and shared a campus dormitory with students who were half his age. He used his seniority to good effect, selling marijuana, methamphetamine, LSD, and crack cocaine to his fellow students as a means of augmenting his student grant. It is thought that Valencia had only been in Waco a week or two before being killed. The public doesn't get as outraged when someone like Valencia turns up dead, but it's still a homicide and just as important as any other, said Richard Stroop, McLennan County Deputy Sheriff. The police described her as a street person, but a sweet woman who loved children. She had no local address, no suitcase, and no belongings. In fact, no one had a clue why she was in Waco at all. She had no relatives there, said her father, Tommy, who lived in Bryan, and it was her mother, Roma, from Fort Worth, who finally reported her missing. 22-year-old Valencia had last been seen alive on the day she died, knocking on McDuff's dormitory door, number 118. The skinny woman was wearing a dark windbreaker, tight blue jeans, and an ornate barrette in her hair. When she received no answer, she went to the window and called out, "Are you ready yet?" She was not seen alive again. On Sunday, the 15th of March, 1992, walkers found a human skull that had been exposed by animals behind the James Connolly Municipal Golf Course and close to the college. An unclothed body was buried in soft, moist clay close by, and the deputies initially had just one lead to help them identify the corpse, a cloison hair comb lying near the body. The inlaid pattern depicted an orange butterfly among green leaves and red flowers. It was Valencia's proudest possession. Dallas medical examiners eventually identified the body by means of fingerprints. Cause of death was recorded as strangulation. McDuff was seen pushing a Ford Thunderbird car a short distance from the Quick Pack No 8 convenience store in the 4200 block of LaSalle Avenue, off Interstate 35, south of Waco, on Monday, the 1st of March, 1992. Richard Bannister said he noticed the incident at about 3:45 p.m. A little later that afternoon, 22-year-old Melissa Northrup went missing from her place of work at the Quick Pack store. Described as 4 feet 11 in tall and weighing 110 pounds, with shoulder-length brown hair and blue eyes, Melissa was 2.5 months pregnant. She lived with her accountant husband, Aaron, at 3014 Pioneer Circle, Waco. The diminutive young woman would have proved no match for a man of McDuff's height and bulk. He stood at over 6 feet and weighed in at 245 pounds. At around 4:15 a.m., a local man who knew Melissa saw her car heading north on Interstate 35. She was in the front passenger seat and looked frightened. When she did not return home, Aaron phoned her, and when he received no reply, he drove to the store, which was closed. The cash register drawer was open and the contents were missing. A customer was in the store, Aaron later told police, and when he saw me, he got real scared and threw his hands up in the air. I threw him the bathroom keys, and told him to please go look for my wife. Then he dialed 911. Police soon determined that $250 had been stolen from the cash register, and despite the fact that several people were sleeping in their cars close to the store, there were no witnesses to Melissa's abduction, although McDuff's Thunderbird was found close by. At approximately 9 p.m. the same day, Sherry Robinson said that McDuff arrived at her Dallas County home and he asked for some food. Within hours of Melissa's abduction, McDuff's details were placed on the U.S. Most Wanted list, and appeals were placed in the newspapers and on television, asking for information regarding his whereabouts. As the police intensified their manhunt, Mark Davis, a former college student friend of McDuff's, came forward to say that on an earlier occasion, McDuff had tried to enlist him to rob the Quick Pack store. Another student, Lewis Bray, reported that McDuff had once boasted that the easiest way to get rid of a body was to slit the abdomen and throw it into water. It was also determined that McDuff had once worked at the Quick Pack store and, ironically, he had been trained by Melissa's husband, Aaron. A fisherman discovered Melissa's corpse floating in a water-filled gravel pit in southeast Dallas County at 6 p.m. on Sunday, the 26th of April. The body was partially dressed in a purple suit and a dark-colored jacket. Part of her lower torso was missing. Her car, a burnt orange 1977 Buick Regal with a white vinyl top, license plate TXLP 287 XHV, was found parked just a mile away and close to Sherry Robinson's home. After forensic tests had been completed, human hairs, identical in every respect to those taken from McDuff, were found on the car's upholstery. McDuff was committing his murders throughout Texas, thereby creating jurisdictional problems, which brought a dozen law enforcement agencies to the conference table to coordinate their inquiries. What was needed was to combine the organizational capabilities of the FBI, U.S. Marshals Service, and the Texas Rangers, but rape and murder are state rather than federal offenses. 2 U.S. Marshals from Waco, Mike and Parnell McNamara, had an idea which offered a way out of the bureaucratic impasse. They had been told that during the time McDuff was at the technical college, he had been supplying LSD and was known to be in possession of a firearm, both of which are federal offenses. Consequently, on Friday, the 6th of March, 1992, the local state attorney issued warrant No. 9280-3100-506Z for McDuff's arrest. 2 months later, they had the break they were waiting for. 36-year-old Gary Smithy worked for a Kansas City refuse collection company. After arriving home on Friday, the 1st of May 1992, he tuned his television set to the America's Most Wanted show and, as was his usual practice, videotaped the program. Smithy was taken by the $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Kenneth McDuff and thought he saw a striking resemblance between the face on the screen and a new coworker called Richard Fowler. The new man had created an impression with his constant boasting about his sexual prowess, particularly with very young women. Smithy thought very carefully about the implications of reporting his suspicions. He did not want to upset Fowler, but the chance of a fast $5,000 was too good an opportunity to miss. He discussed the tape he had made of the TV program with a work colleague before phoning the Kansas City police. Sergeant J.D. Johnson took the call and immediately ran a search through their computer for the name Richard Fowler. Information came on the screen reporting that a man, answering a description that fitted both Fowler and McDuff, had been arrested during a prostitution sting and been charged with soliciting. The detective then carried out a fingerprint comparison between the two names, with the result that Fowler's record card matched that of McDuff. The next morning, Johnson ascertained which truck McDuff was due to join as a crew member and determined the route that the trash collection truck would take on Monday, the 4th of May. He learned that it would be going to a landfill site south of Kansas City between 1:00 p.m. and 2:00 p.m. The police set up a 6-man surveillance team working under the guise of a commercial vehicle stop detail. We wanted to make sure the location we picked was isolated in the event of trouble, Johnson explained. McDuff was reported to be armed and dangerous. The site we picked was the type where some vehicles were routinely stopped, and there were no people around. To lend further authenticity to their plans, the police borrowed a car that Kansas City engineers used for their routine truck inspections. When the vehicle in which McDuff was riding approached, a lone officer waved it to the checkpoint. Instantly smelling danger, McDuff made an attempt to get out and make a run for it, but he was stopped in his tracks at gunpoint and made no further attempt to escape. McDuff was indicted in the 54th Judicial District Court of McLennan County, Texas, on the 26th of June, 1992, for the capital murder of Melissa Northrup, while in the course of committing and attempting to commit kidnapping, robbery, or the murder of another pursuant to the same scheme and course of conduct. He was found guilty as charged. On the 18th of February, 1993, following a separate punishment hearing, the jury affirmatively answered the first special issue submitted to Article 37.071b, 1 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, and answered negatively to the second special issue submitted pursuant to Article 37.071i. In accordance with the state law, the trial court imposed the death sentence. McDuff's conviction and sentence were automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which affirmed the conviction on the 28th of April, 1997. Then McDuff filed a petition for a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, a legal technicality requesting that proceedings be moved to a higher court. This was denied on the 12th of January, 1998. Next, McDuff filed a petition for a state writ of habeas corpus, which was denied on the 15th of April, 1998, by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On the 29th of April, 1998, the 54th Judicial Court of McLennan County, Texas, set McDuff's execution date for the 21st of October, 1998. Counsel was appointed on the 30th of April, 1998, to represent McDuff in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas, Waco Division. On the 8th of July, 1998, McDuff filed a petition for a federal writ of habeas corpus. The state responded with an answer and motion for summary judgment on McDuff's claims. The Western District Court denied habeas corpus relief on the 15th of October, 1998, granting summary judgment for the state and lifting the stay of execution. The court also rescheduled McDuff's execution for the 17th of November, 1998. McDuff filed a notice of appeal on the 23rd of October, and 3 days later, the Western District Court denied McDuff's request for a certificate of appealability. His appeal to the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals was denied, and the Supreme Court denied his last appeal for a stay of execution on the 16th of November, 1998. A man familiar with the routine of carrying out executions by lethal injection is Assistant Warden in charge of executions in Texas, Neil Hodges. Speaking about the reality of this method of judicial death, he said, "People think this is all painless and stuff like that. It ain't. Basically, the condemned, suffer a lot. They are sort of paralyzed, but they can hear. They drown in their own fluid and suffocate to death, really. Yeah, we get problems. Sometimes the guy doesn't want to get onto the table, but we have the largest guard in Texas here. He gets them on that table, no problem. They are strapped down in seconds, no problem. They go on that mean old table and get the goodnight juice whether they like it or not. On the 17th of November 1998, a large group of reporters stood outside the Walls prison in Huntsville, Texas, in an area reserved for the press. The Walls is the oldest of all the prison units in Texas. It also houses the death chamber. Perfectly suiting the occasion, a single, heavy, dark cloud hovered over the prison. Near a concrete picnic table, a jungle of photographers' tripods looked like a flock of ostriches. Mercifully, a gentle breeze flapped at the cautionary yellow "Do Not Crosses" police tapes. No one in the press saw a single anti-death penalty protester. Earlier in the day, inmate number 999055, Kenneth McDuff, had been taken from his cell at Ellis Unit and driven 15 miles to the Walls. Even for a stone-cold killer like McDuff, his first sight of the death house was a sobering one. The truck that had brought him to his final destination pulled to a stop in front of a set of wire gates topped with razor wire, glinting and sparkling in the Texas sunlight. Shackled and cuffed, he was led through 2 steel doors. On his left was a row of cells. He was allocated the second one, furnished simply with a bunk, a small table, and a chair. The bed linen was spotless, as were the cream-painted walls. Next to McDuff's cell was a strictly no-contact cell. The door was covered with a fine steel mesh screen, painted black. It was used by inmates should they wish to give instructions to an attorney. In the corridor and to his right was another wooden table with 2 chairs. On it, McDuff noticed a Bible and a telephone. There was no ashtray as smoking was forbidden. Lethal injection was first legally introduced as a method of execution in 1977 in the states of Oklahoma and Texas. The first prisoner to die by this means was 43-year-old Charlie Brooks, who had been sentenced to death for his part in the murder of a used car dealer in Fort Worth in 1971. Brooks finally gave up his appeals against the death sentence and died in Huntsville prison on the 7th of December, 1982. The practice of giving hospital patients a pre-med injection to sedate them before going into the operating theater prior to general anesthesia is a common procedure. It relaxes the patient and takes away the tension. This concept offered a number of advantages to those responsible for dispatching condemned inmates to perdition. The drugs were certainly available and cheap to use. There was also the added humane dimension inasmuch as lethal injection was a clinical procedure carried out in appropriate surroundings. Gone were the dread gallows, the ominous electric chair with all its wiring and leather helmet and death mask. Gone, too, was the evil-looking gas chamber with its sickly green-colored walls and mass of rods, tubes, and linkages. When using a lethal cocktail of drugs, the condemned inmate would be led from a holding cell to a hospital gurney to be strapped down and injected intravenously. There were benefits as well for the state authorities. The whole idea would appeal to the media and public alike, for execution could not possibly be made more merciful. A team of paramedics would attend to the inserting of a needle into the victim's right or left arm, and a doctor would be, as with all executions, in attendance to pronounce death. Addie McDuff had arrived too late to see her son on his last day, and he was allowed no special privileges other than a choice of menu for his final meal, which consisted of 2 T-bone steaks, 5 fried eggs, vegetables, French fries, coconut pie, and a single Coca-Cola. As he completed his meal, he contemplated the end, which he thought would be painless, but he didn't know that he was going to be injected with a combination of 3 drugs, all acidic, with a pH value higher than 6, which would burn so terribly that he would feel as if he was being injected with fire. At 5:58 p.m., the warden received word that the Supreme Court had turned down McDuff's final request for a stay of execution, and the witnesses started to arrive through the main prison gate to be escorted to the death house. They might have noticed the sheeting now draped over the steel gates, hiding the hearse that was waiting to receive the body. After being given a body search to check for hidden weapons or concealed cameras, they were led to the viewing room, which was separated from the gurney by a window and closed curtains. At 5:44 p.m., the killer was given a pre-injection of 8 cc 2% sodium pentothal. Waiting silently in an adjacent room was the cell extraction team, wearing protective clothing and armed with mace gas to subdue McDuff if he caused trouble. Their particular skills have never been called upon at an execution in Texas. At 6:08 p.m., McDuff was invited to leave his cell. He agreed, and no guard touched him as he walked the few steps to the chamber door, which opened before him. He paused momentarily when he saw the gurney with its white padding and cover sheet. 2 arm supports were pulled out, and he saw the brown hide straps dangling loose with an officer by each one. At 7:08 p.m., McDuff was strapped down, and the paramedics inserted 2 16-gauge needles and catheters into both of his arms. These were connected by flexible tubes to the executioner's position, which was hidden from view. The doctor also attached a cardiac monitor and stethoscope to the prostrate man's chest. The curtains were drawn back, and Warden Jim Willett asked McDuff if he had any last words to say into the microphone above his head. McDuff replied simply, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." Inside the witness area, Parnell McNamara gently placed his hand on the shoulder of 74-year-old Jack Brand. "I've been waiting for this for 32 years, said the father of Robert Brand, who was murdered by McDuff in 1966. "Are you all right?" Parnell asked quietly. "I feel like 32 years have been lifted from my life," the old man said. McDuff looked scared as over the next 10 seconds he was given an injection of sodium thiopental, a fast-acting anesthetic which takes effect within about 10 seconds. He would have felt a slight pressure and his arms start to ache. Then he would feel lightheaded. After a 1-minute interval, this was followed by 15 cc of normal saline to ease the passage of 50 mg/50 cc pancuronium bromide. Pavilon is a curare-derived muscle relaxant which paralyzes respiratory function and brings unconsciousness in about 10 seconds. McDuff felt pressure in his chest. It was a suffocating feeling that caused him to gasp several times for air. He was dizzy and hyperventilating. His heart beat faster and faster as his entire nervous system came under attack. This is called the stress syndrome, a common feature during the first stages of dying. As the poison permeated through his body, McDuff entered the second stage of death. He was unable to breathe or move, but he could still see and hear. He was paralyzed and not able to swallow at this stage, a condition which leads many witnesses to believe that death has intervened. McDuff was still alive, but his central nervous system was beginning to shut down. His eyes dilated and the hairs on his skin stood erect as he was injected with another 15 cc of saline, and finally, a massive dose of potassium chloride, 1.502.70 mx/kg. When injected intravenously in large doses, this drug burns and hurts because it is a naturally occurring salt and instantly disrupts the chemical balance of the blood. It causes the muscles to tighten up in extreme contraction, and the instant it reaches the heart muscle, it causes the heart to stop beating. While McDuff was sedated by the thiopental and couldn't draw breath because of the Pavilon, he was physically unable to scream in pain when the potassium was injected, sending his heart into a crunching, excruciating cramp. There was a 2-minute wait while the doctors examined McDuff and pronounced him dead. The curtains were opened for the witnesses to view the body. Mrs. Brenda Solomon, mother of one of McDuff's victims, was moved to say, "He looked like the devil. He's going where he needs to go. I feel happy. I feel wonderful." The cost of the drugs administered to take McDuff's life was $86.08. The sad thing about this particular case is that if Colleen had screamed and someone had heard her, it would have been McDuff's mother. She would have been in earshot because she lives just a few hundred yards away, commented investigator Tim Steglich. Inquiries into the life and crimes of Kenneth Allen McDuff included interviews with his mother Addie, his school teachers, and several residents of Rosebud who knew the McDuffs well. I spoke to Falls County Sheriff Larry Pamplin, McDuff's accomplice Roy Dale Green, who now lives in a flea-ridden shack in Marlin, U.S. Marshals Mike and Parnell McNamara, the state prosecutor Bill Johnston, and Tim Steglich. Background research included a visit, accompanied by Tim Steglich, to the lonely track where McDuff murdered Colleen Reed. In the dead of night, that would be a terrible place to die, said State's Attorney William Bill Johnston with just a hint of tears in his eyes. The McDuff family are a tough lot with a reputation to match. The pistol-packing mama, Addie McDuff, has never given an interview and even refused to speak to the police, but she made a rare exception by speaking to me. Such is her reputation for pulling a gun that the Waco police offered to keep watch outside her isolated ranch at Belton and waited until I emerged unscathed. Although I was expecting immediate hostility, a frail, confused old lady appeared at the door offering a traditionally cautious Texas welcome. Addie is a protective mother, despite her son's evil deeds. Over coffee, and she apologized that she didn't have tea, she explained that one of her sons had been shot dead while sleeping with another man's wife, and that a daughter had died in a road crash. Mr. McDuff had been buried way back, and now she had no one except a niece. Addie was about to sell up and move in with her. Asked how she had acquired the name Pistol Packin' Mama, she smiled. Rosebud was a tough place to live in the early days, she said in a cracked voice. The driver of a school bus threatened to throw Ken off as he had spent the fare. It was dark, and no boy of mine was going to walk a long ways home, so I just visited the bus depot the next morning and pulled out my .22. Told him that next time he did it, it would be his last. Then she chuckled. No one never did talk down to my family again. She rooted through cardboard boxes of mementos looking for documents or any picture of Ken in his early days, but there was precious little to find. She had destroyed everything years ago. The next port of call was Rosebud itself, a dusty one-horse town, and with just over 1,000 inhabitants, it has the pretension to call itself a city. Main Street is nearly always deserted, even on weekends. During a Texas barbecue, a mid-afternoon indoor feast, the town manager, a reporter, several residents, and the 70-year-old chief of police recalled the young Ken McDuff. Clearly, they had been terrorized by the youth in those days, a feeling supported by Falls County Sheriff Larry Pamplin, whose father was the sheriff before him. Driving me around in his beat-up, unmarked police cruiser, which was stocked full of shotguns and pistols, Larry explained that McDuff and his older brother John were among the roughest hooligans he had ever met. Larry Pamplin has since been dismissed from office after committing aggravated assault, official misconduct, and racketeering. It was proved that he had misspent funds to feed his prisoners, keeping a tidy sum back for himself. Interviewing Virginia Moore's mother in a Waco motel proved a harrowing experience. She is now a mental wreck who, for several years, drove the dirt roads of Waco with a spade in search of her missing daughter's body. "I don't wish ill on McDuff," she sobbed. "I just want to give her a Christian burial, just as Addie McDuff will want for her son." Her wish has now been granted. Finally, there was the much-anticipated meeting with Kenneth McDuff on death row, Ellis Unit, Texas. In life, he was a tall man, well-built, with greasy black hair. Wearing a constant sneer, he whinged on for an hour about the injustices committed by the judicial and prison system. He argued about the merest technicalities of his case, yet, ever the hypocrite, he admitted all of the crimes attributed to him, while refusing to say where his victims were buried, unless he was paid a handsome fee. I don't think that the state of Texas will let me live unless they want me to have a long, drawn-out, slow life. I have sugar diabetes, so at some point I am going to have some serious problems. But the bottom line is I want to be the one to decide when I'm to die. And I will do this by deciding when I'm going to drop my appeals. I've never been one to run, and I won't grant them the satisfaction of running me all the way to the ground. I believe there is a good possibility that both my convictions may be reversed. Asked why he had not settled down and started some form of meaningful relationship with a woman, he replied, "I feel very old and tired. Once I wanted a wife and family just like other people do. Right now I'm like a man in the desert that is thousands of miles from the nearest water, with no possibility of reaching water, but keeps walking anyway. I don't know why I keep walking. Is it some inner instinct sick to strive on? Now let's talk about money. Well, on this one, I'm like the man in the desert that struck gold and can only carry out what he can carry. I only have need for a few $1,000s, like for burial expenses, and to maintain myself while I live. I will charge whomever $700 per body. Use an international money order or postal orders will do. Have it sent to my inmates trust fund in my name. When the first amount clears, I'll give you and the law a body. That way I don't get shafted, you know. Now that is an expression of true evil.